Hello and welcome. I'm Charlotte Gibson, president of Charlottesville NOW. Thank you to everyone joining us for tonight's program to celebrate Earth Day. CVille NOW is honored to co-host tonight's program with the Piedmont group of the Virginia chapter of the Sierra Club, and its president, Donna Shaughnessy, is joining us as a moderator tonight. Welcome, Donna.
Hey, Charlotte.
And now on to our program, which will be introduced tonight by Kathy Falzer, Vice President of Action and Programs. Thank you, Kathy, for your and your committee's work in putting together this program.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kathy Falzer, First Vice President of Charlottesville NOW. Thank you to everyone joining us for tonight's program to celebrate Earth Day, saving our planet, starting in our community. Before beginning our program, I want first to acknowledge that the land we are on is the home of the Monacan Indian Nation, one of the oldest groups of indigenous people still residing on their ancestral homeland. Please join us in acknowledging the Monacan people as the traditional custodians of this land and in paying respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I also want to extend a warm welcome to Donna Shaughnessy, president of the Sierra Club's Piedmont Group, co-host of tonight's program celebrating Earth Day 2022. Earth Day, celebrated every year on April 22nd, began in 1970 as campus teach-in events and caught on across the US with 20 million Americans, almost 10% of the population participating. The first Earth Day led to the creation of the United States Environmental Protection Agency and the passage of other first-of-their-kind environmental laws, including the National Environmental Education Act, the Occupational Safety and Health Act, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and the Endangered Species Act. In 1990, Earth Day went global and has continued to grow with citizens of the world rising up to demand greater action for our planet. Today, the youth of the world are again taking to the streets to demand a new way forward. On February 28th, the UN released a grim report with experts around the world in agreement that immediate action is needed to secure a livable future, warning that delay means death. As a leader of a women's rights organization, it is especially concerning that globally, the climate crisis disproportionately impacts women who bear the brunt of natural disasters. Yet women, not surprisingly, are systematically left out of the conversations and political processes that could lead to more environmentally conscious climate policies. Women's rights and the climate crisis are inextricably linked, both demanding the world to act before it is too late. Tonight, we're grateful to have joining us representatives from our local governments and university to share their current and planned efforts to mitigate the negative effects of climate change. Gabe Dayley from Albemarle County, Andrea Ruedy Trimble from the University of Virginia, Susan Elliott from the city of Charlottesville, and Peggy Van Yahres of the Charlottesville Tree Commission. If you would each like to say hello to our audience, I believe Doug has you unmuted. Anybody?
Hi.
Thank you, guys.
Hi.
Welcome all. Thank you for joining us this evening and sharing your time and expertise on this critically important topic. Alex, you can go ahead and start us off.
Hello, I'm Alex Legon, third Vice President of Charlottesville NOW. A reminder as we begin the program, please put your questions for the speakers in the chat as they occur to you, and I'll pose them to the speakers after everyone has presented. Our first speaker tonight is Gabe Dayley, who serves as Climate Protection Program Manager for the County of Albemarle, Virginia. He is responsible for coordinating implementation of the county's climate action plan. This includes facilitating collaboration across local government, public schools, and community stakeholders to achieve reductions in greenhouse gas emissions while promoting local health, well-being, and prosperity. Gabe received a master's degree in international peace and conflict resolution from American University and a bachelor's in international relations from Pomona College. His graduate work focused on the application of conflict transformation to tackling environment challenges. Welcome, Mr. Dayley.
Thank you so much. Alexis, thanks for that kind introduction. And Charlotte, Donna, Kathy, thank you so much for organizing this event and just for framing the topic the way that you did. I really appreciate the land acknowledgement and also just the acknowledgement of the global impacts of climate change on women. And also, it's interesting. I don't know I don't have the exact statistic at the top of my head, but I know that a large majority of that women are a very large majority of those involved in food production. So you mentioned being in potentially more kind of frontline and vulnerable positions to the adverse impacts of climate change, and also kind of right there in terms of capacity for solutions and meaningful contributions to solutions. So what you said about needing to be at the table more often is so important. So I really appreciate that those points that you all brought in framing the conversation. So like Alexa said, I work for Albemarle County. I'm the Climate Protection Program Manager. And I wanted to just share a couple of very broad highlights. It won't be comprehensive, but just some kind of pinpoint a few things of the kind of local work that we're doing at the county level in terms of local climate action. So let me get a screen share going just to give a little bit of visual. Maybe if the moderators can give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen. Great. Cool. So I just wanted to highlight 3 things for folks this evening and look forward to questions and conversation at the end. But I wanted to mention something brief about the county's climate action plan, the planning document that we have that outlines our goals and strategies. I imagine that some folks on this call are familiar with that plan, but maybe not everyone is. So I wanted to just mention a brief overview of that. Second, wanted to share a brief update about our climate protection program broadly, which includes implementing the climate action plan and also includes a couple of other big areas. And then I thought I would highlight one specific project that we're currently working on, what we're calling an environmental stewardship hub, which will be a resource for folks on the county website with different ways that members of the community can become more engaged and participate in community-wide climate action. So in fall of 2020, the Board of Supervisors adopted a climate action plan that had been in the works for several years. Many staff in the county local government, as well as many folks from the community, worked in different working groups to participate in coming up with goals, strategies, and actions for our climate action plan. And by the way, to even just take a fuller step back, probably folks on the call, many folks may be familiar with this idea of climate action planning. It's something that local governments started doing back into the late 2000s, early 2010s, but it particularly picked up as local communities saw kind of the absence of strong enough or wide enough action at the federal and state levels. And so climate action plan is basically a document that outlines goals, strategies, and actions to help reduce our contribution to global warming, to climate change, hopefully reduce the adverse impacts for the severity, and also includes elements around building our resilience to the changes that are already coming. So if I give that kind of big picture step, so Albemarle County has a climate action plan that we adopted in 2020. Number of folks on this call, I think I saw a couple names, were involved in some of the stakeholder groups that helped define strategies and actions. And there's a number of key themes that we try to bring to bear in those actions throughout, which is really important. And the work ultimately is leading towards greenhouse gas emission reduction targets in the coming decades. There's 5 big areas that the county's climate action plan addresses. These are fairly common to a lot of climate action plans from localities across the country, but actions to look at, transportation, increasing bikeability and walkability, access to transit, for example, as well as land use, how to make those possible for people to make choices for alternative modes of transportation. Looking at energy use at the scale of buildings specifically, and then also looking at energy at the utility scale in terms of renewable energy generation broadly. Of course, the photo I have there is on a rooftop, so that's a little bit more building scale, but wanted to show a picture from the county of a solar array. We also have a chapter in the plan that looks at materials management, which focuses on all aspects of recycling as well as composting. And then we have a chapter on landscape, natural resources, and agriculture, looking at how we can bring best environmental stewardship practices and land management practices to how we care for our land and local ecosystems. So that's climate action plan in just a few words for the county. And like I mentioned, that was adopted in 2020, and it's a document, it's a bit of a roadmap. Now is the challenging work of implementing that climate action plan. So the work that we're involved in right now has 2 main prongs. One of those is implementing the actions in the plan that are community oriented, that are hoping to kind of encourage action across the community. And that falls on a spectrum from education, kind of promoting certain ideas, awareness raising, through incentives, through policy making that maybe can change some of the sort of regulatory environment here locally in the county. And one of the main things that we're working on right now with that implementation work is to help prioritize those actions and score them across some of those different indicators, like their benefit to health, local environment, equity and inclusion, as well as their impact on greenhouse gas emission reductions. And the reason that we're doing that is our plan, can share it in the chat a little bit later, a link to it, but our plan has 135 action areas. That's a lot. And so it'll be helpful for us to basically prioritize and score so that we can be as strategic as possible with implementing those. It's important for local government to lead by example. And so we also have a set of actions that relate to the operational policies and procedures of Albemarle County. So that's another key area of work. And then we also need to monitor and evaluate progress. And we do that by taking account of our greenhouse gas emissions every 2 years. So that's implementing the climate action plan. And then another big chunk of our climate program overall is getting more into climate adaptation and resilience planning. So our action plan focuses on strategies to help reduce the severity of climate change, reduce our contribution to climate change. But we also know that climate change is here now, and it will continue to intensify even despite global action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So we're kind of getting ready to kickstart a planning process for climate resilience planning that will be a similar planning process to the climate action plan. We're adding some new elements to it, but we'll be looking to address kind of key vulnerabilities and risks, key exposures to climate hazards that you can see listed here, so that hopefully as a community, we can be better prepared for those weather events as they come. I had this one slide in here, which I think I'm going to skip because of I was going to switch to another screen share to show you a different website, but I want to be mindful of my time and jump to something that's a little bit more interesting. If there's time at the end, or for folks who are interested, then another point I can share kind of a big map that visualizes what I just shared with you, but I won't go into too much detail with that. It's kind of a map of our overall program that gives a sense of what we're working on. But I'll skip that just for the sake of time. I don't want to go over myself. So the third thing that I wanted to share with you is that was a kind of a bird's eye view program update. And I thought it might be interesting to give a specific example that is timely of one of the types of things that my colleagues and I at the county work on together in collaboration that we hope will help promote and further advance climate action in our local community. So I should say that this project I'm about to talk about arose initially from a project that a colleague of mine is working on called the Stream Health Initiative in the county. Kim Biasioli is the Natural Resources Program Manager. She and I work very closely on climate programs. And this project kind of grew out of her, the Stream Health Initiative that she spearheaded. We're creating a better, more user-friendly, accessible resource on the county's website for regular community members to be able to come and do two things: learn about county programs and check out resources for community members to act in different ways, at home, on your land, if you have it, and in the community. And the impetus for this in part is the fact that if you go to the county's website right now and you want to learn about climate action or our biodiversity action plan or waste reduction, you have to click all over and go deep into different department pages like community development, or in the climate action case, facilities and environmental services, and click through a number of layers to find what you're looking for. And there's different resources for community members, both for learning resources as well as cost share programs that are buried kind of in subpages of subpages. And so what we would like to have, and what we're currently working on, is a hub that can be a little bit more of a one-stop shop for community members who want to learn about what the county's up to and see how you can become involved, and then also get some ideas for things that you can do at home or in your community to help with local climate action. So the webpage is in process, but one of the things I'm excited about, we've been working closely with the county's communications office to create something that's really visually enticing, very colorful, not just a dry web page of text. So this is kind of a cute graphic that our colleague made to give you a sense of what it might be like to scroll through this while sitting at your desk on your computer. But there'll be some nice kind of big colorful buttons that we hope will invite people into, if they want to learn more about the county's programs on those areas: biodiversity, climate action, clean water, reducing waste. Of course, those have a lot of intersections with each other. And then there's, we'll have a link to a section on what ways that you can make a difference. And this is just an example of one of those pages I thought I would share. The page itself is not quite ready to actually do a screen share of me navigating around the website itself, so I did a screenshot. But this is an example of a list of actions that we would have in the section of what you can do at home. So things like shrinking your lawn, going solar, getting a home energy audit, which speaks to some of the resources that Local Energy Alliance program, LEAP, has. And I'm really excited about this because of just again, the kind of attention to imagery and color to hopefully make it kind of more visually appealing than sometimes local government web pages can be, including many of the counties. And we also list for each of these actions the different kind of program areas that they help support. So biodiversity, climate action, and clean water in this case. This one is somewhat of a sort of a placeholder description. The actual one will be a little longer. For most of these actions, we also link to outside resources or resources that the county has. So, you know, it's not just going to give you a sentence that says, you should do this. It'll say, here is something you can do, and here are some ways that you can either learn more about how to do that you can access help with doing it, or that you might even be able to access kind of financial resources to help with it. So I'm excited about this. And as you can see, it's going to launch on Earth Day. So we'll be at one of the, I think UVA, their tabling event going on that's open to the community. And I'll have an iPad there to kind of show people the live resource itself. So we're excited to use this as a basis for continued community outreach and education efforts. So I think I'll stop there. Hopefully I didn't go over on time and left plenty for my colleagues. Thanks all for letting me share a bit of that with you.
Gosh, thanks, Gabe. That was I'm really looking forward to that resource page, because I think a lot of people are kind of lost in some of the things, and that's really exciting. And thank you for that great summary about what the county's been up to. It's my honor to introduce our next speaker, Andrea Ruedy Trimble, She's the Sustainability Director at the University of Virginia. And I'll just say, I'm going to say the word sustainability about 50 more times in the course of this introduction. She's been a leader in higher education sustainability initiatives for over 16 years. Andrea leads a great team, I'd say, of UVA Office for Sustainability staff focused on pan-university strategic planning, engagement, communication, analysis, sustainable building, and a myriad of programs across sustainability impact areas aligned with UVA sustainability goals. She currently co-teaches 2 courses at UVA, Sustainability Leadership and Bright Climate. That's WRITE. Prior to joining UVA in November 2014, Andrea managed Harvard University's Sustainable Building Program in Harvard's Office for Sustainability. She taught university courses in design and sustainability and worked in architecture, historic preservation, and sustainability consulting. She holds a Bachelor's of Architecture from Virginia Tech, a Master of Liberal Arts in Sustainability and Environmental Management from the Harvard Extension School, and a Master of Science in Historic Preservation from Columbia University. Andrea is also an artist, because apparently that isn't enough, what she's doing already. She's a juried member of McGuffey Art Center, is on the board of 2nd Street Gallery, and is co-founder of Draw Charlottesville. Welcome, Andrea.
Thank you, Donna, so much for that kind introduction. And thank you, Gabe, for teeing us up. There will be lots of great conversation afterwards, I think. I will also share my screen. Let's see. I am going to give you some context, and then I'm going to dive a little bit deeper. Feel free to pull the plug on me if I go a little bit too late. I'll try to keep track of time. I like to start with UVA at a glance. Because we are like a small city. We have over 500 buildings, over 17 million square feet, tens of thousands of students, as well as staff and faculty across 12 schools. We have some unique opportunities, having a UNESCO World Heritage Site on the lawn, being a very high research activity university, and then having a health system, major health system with over 600 beds. All of that are part of our sustainability goals. I also like to mention our team. We have one of the larger sustainability offices in the country, which enables us to do a lot and to really dive deep and want to acknowledge everything that they do. We have engineers, we have a communications person, we have people who do outreach and engagement, people who focus on labs, and a lot of students who we also pay to do things like green living and outreach and waste minimization throughout the year. All right, so our sustainability framework, this is also really important for us as well as higher education in general. The way that we approach our strategic planning all the way down to implementation is the intersections between how we steward our resources, that's our climate action goals, our waste goals, our food goals, how we engage our community in sustainability and build that awareness and translate it to action, and then how we use our strengths in research and teaching, and using the grounds as a learning tool through Discover. So Steward, Engage, Discover is something that is a thread throughout our work. So now I'll focus on the climate and the climate action plan. So our first climate goal was a 25% reduction below 2009 levels by 2025. We achieved that 6 years early in 2019 through several different measures, utility scale solar, a lot of work on the district plant side, and lots of work in existing buildings. So in 2019, we started developing our next sustainability plan and trying to figure out what our next goals would be. We presented those to the Board of Visitors in December of 2019, and they were approved. The big one is to be carbon neutral by 2030 and fossil fuel free by 2050. That's the one I'll focus on for the presentation. But we also have steward goals around waste. The waste is 30%, so a 70% reduction in our footprint in what we generate. That's probably one of our tougher goals, as well as engage goals and research and teaching goals. So when we're looking at our strategic plan and we have these goals around governance, engage, steward, and discover, we have the university strategic plan. What we're trying to do is, while we align with the larger university goals, and we have these sustainability goals. Now we're really digging deeper into those goals and creating action plans, as well as school and unit strategic plans. So each of the schools and units are writing essentially their accountability plan for how they work towards UVA sustainability goals. And then we're also writing across those climate action plans, food action plan, nitrogen action plan, water action plan, which are frameworks for how we're going to do this and when. So I mentioned carbon neutral 2030, fossil fuel free by 2050. We are very close to finalizing our first climate action plan, our 2030 climate action plan, and we're working on some budget requests related to that. We'll describe to you what's included in that. This is very much part of a web of sustainability in higher education, which is my passion because of that connection with research and teaching and the opportunities that we have to have very big global impact, both in our operations, if what we do are replicable across universities, as well as our teaching and research. So we're part of a network with the schools listed here, where we really focus on how we accelerate action by sharing information. We also have a dedicated partnership with William & Mary. They set the same climate goal as us, a 2030 goal, in December 2019, and our presidents decided to form a partnership in order to work together, not necessarily in lockstep with them, but to help each other meet this goal in the most effective ways. All right, this is, I promise, the only one that has a ton of text on it. I'm happy to share these slides, but this is important because the boundaries include all of our UVA properties in the main vicinity of ground. So that's over 550 buildings. It includes our health system. These buildings, so we purchase electricity, and so that feeds the buildings, but we also generate our own thermal energy through some heat plants too. So pretty much everything that we include is everything in our operational control, which aligns with third-party guidance around how to set a boundary for greenhouse gas. And then within those boundaries, about half of our carbon footprint is on the academic side and half is UV help. It's unusual for a school to include their health system in there. It makes the school goal even particularly difficult if you think about the challenges of patient care and resilience that's needed to ensure that we are powering the health system appropriately. But it's important to us, was important to us to make sure that we include as much as possible. And so when we include our footprint, we are including scope 1, which is the fuels we burn on ground to generate energy, which is about 40%. We're including our fleet, which is very small relative to what we have, but we include it, and then refrigerants and fertilizer, scope 1. And then scope 2 is electricity that we purchase from Dominion, and that's scope 2. Our scope 3 emissions, we are building up better data. We have our commuting data actually shows up in the county as well as the city's footprint because of the way that the VDOT information is. So we left that out of this one for the purposes of calculating so that we're not double counting. We get this question a lot. But we are actively working on strategies to reduce those and to build out our other scope 3 emissions numbers like our flights and so on so that we can actively reduce those. All right, so some of the things that we've been doing, new buildings. We have very comprehensive green building standards around process as well as prescriptive. We have energy targets for every new construction building, which are about, we set a baseline based on UVA buildings of like type, and we require at least a 25% reduction below that for anything new that's built. And then we also require LEED certifications. We have over 74 LEED buildings. We track this very carefully. We have building meters on a meter on every single building. So we're able to really look in depth and report on what we're seeing in our existing buildings. This is the rotunda if you're curious. So I'm happy to share these. But we saw deep reductions when the rotunda was renovated. And we track that and we report on that and we understand why to be able to replicate that across buildings. We also have a really comprehensive existing buildings program called Delta Force. And so I mentioned the historic preservation and the research and the patient care opportunities. We've done about 3 or 4 million, or between 3 and 4 million square feet of retrofits, about 75 buildings. And we saved the university, now I think this is an older slide, but about $69 million in energy savings since the program was started. And about a 13% carbon reduction just attributable to this energy efficiency program. And this is run by the engineers in the Office for Sustainability. Also, renewable energy, and we'll do more of this, but we have on-site solar as well as off-site solar. About 20% of our electricity comes from was offset, I guess, by 2 off-site solar projects, Hollyfield and Polar. And then if you're curious, these are fun to play with. We have a renewable energy tracker and we have a building performance energy tracker. You can go in and see real-time data on solar production as well as our building energy use, if you're curious. All right, so that was a little bit of background. That's sort of, we had our original goal, we set new goals. We've been doing this work around new construction, existing buildings, measuring, analyzing, and so on. Now we're in the process of almost finalizing our next climate action plan. So goal is to reduce to 0. I won't read through all these numbers, but in 2010, our baseline was about 291,000 MTCD. We've reduced that by about 43%. We have new numbers coming out soon, which are still in about that range. So despite returning back to normal operations, we'll bump up a little bit, but not much. The good news is we're going down, but also since 2010, our population has increased and our square footage has increased about 20%, but we've reduced our emissions per person and per square foot by about half. So we know our, despite growth, we're still going down and normalized emissions are better. Our big challenge is growth. We're building a lot of new buildings. If we were to stop all strategies now, this is a graph of where we would end up. Obviously, we're not going to stop all strategies right now. This isn't business as usual. This is everything stops, and we would go up to 266. So that's the number we're using when we're trying to figure out how far we need to reduce. So we have our engineers developed internally a building emissions model to understand the impact of various strategies relative to our anticipated growth. We're going to add about 4 million square feet, I think, which is about 60 to 70,000 square foot. We know that with our current strategies, if we do continue business as usual, we can get to about 56% of those reductions. Obviously not enough to get to 0, but we have some solid current ones, current strategies, but we need to obviously do more. So when we wrote the plan, are very focused on, this is common knowledge probably to most people, but optimization, conservation, efficiency first, and then going to carbon-free energy for what we can't reduce or eliminate. And then very last resort for us will be offsets. We need more work to do to feel comfortable with that approach. But if we have remaining emissions in 2030, we will have to consider that. All right, so our climate action plan, we're aligning with equity, the great and good plan at the university, the mission of the university, and we're focused on supply and demand. So we are looking at, if you really here, maybe look at the orange and the purple. So a lot of the vast bulk of the strategies that we need to focus on are the energy supply and the building engagement. So on the right are several of the strategies that we're employing. So the plan that we've written has details on all the possibilities within those. What's really important in our climate action plan is that this orange section, so we've got the building efficiency strategies, the energy, which are the demand side, the energy supply strategies, how we're supplying the energy, fleet, which is very, very small, important, but tiny in regards to our larger footprint, but still important, operations, and then what we think we'll see from the Virginia Clean Economy Act. There's a separate study that's underway right now, which is the Strategic Thermal Energy Study. And so this is about 40-ish% of the reductions that we need. And these are things like fuel transitions, looking at geo-exchange, looking at how the future of how we generate thermal energy on grounds, with a close eye to that fossil fuel free goal, which is really important to us too in the longer term. So we're putting together this framework, but that plan will sort of come later and it's a lot more detailed. Right now, the plan within the strategy, we came up with 4 decarbonization pathways: business as usual, which is about 50%, building efficiency, which is, I want to say 65-ish%, path B, Path C, which is more in the 70%, and then Path D all in, which is 98%. We are starting to hone in on a recommended pathway now. Our plan was like, let's put everything out there, every possibility. We worked with students, staff, faculty. We had several working groups develop this, and now our recommended strategy is somewhere in the 90% range. Again, a lot of it will rely on that strategic thermal energy study with sort of a TBD section. And we'll, as these next few years go on, we'll figure out how to get the rest of the way there. So I tend to talk too fast, but that's a very, very quick overview of where we are with our climate action planning. And it does, I didn't mention the teaching and the research, but we have and all the engagement aspects and all the things that relate to our climate action plan that aren't the quantifiable reductions. But one example is this summer, UVA is hosting a decarbonization academy for students. So students will be paid to work on various decarbonization projects and will get an educational opportunity. They'll get to tour their heat plant and get to tour renewable energy. So that's one example of where we're trying to connect with research, curriculum, learning opportunities, professional development students with our plan. But sustainability, Virginia.edu is a great place to find this information. We report annually on our greenhouse gas emissions. We have our plan up there, lots of ways to engage in our social media. So I will stop there and pass it on to the next person.
Thank you so much, Andrea. As a college student myself, I really enjoy hearing how higher ed is taking on the climate crisis and what they're doing to make college campuses, which are not very sustainable places, more sustainable. Just a reminder for our audience, if you have questions for any of our speakers, please type them into the chat for the Q&A. And our next speaker is Susan Elliott, the Climate Protection Program Manager for the City of Charlottesville. The Climate Protection Program aims to reduce greenhouse gas emissions associated with community and municipal activities within the City of Charlottesville's jurisdictional boundary and to help Charlottesville adapt to climate change effects. She's a master's in public administration, a master's in urban and environmental planning, and a Bachelor of Arts degree. Susan moved to Charlottesville in 2008 and has worked at the city since 2012. Welcome, Ms. Elliott.
Thank you for having me and for everyone for the wonderful presentations that teed us off and the introductions today. Appreciate everyone's time and being here and taking a bit of this, what I think is actually a quite lovely evening. So I'm glad that you're all willing to be connected to computers with us for this. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen right there. That's good, you guys can see that. So where I wanted to start with within the city's climate program, we have been branding our climate planning process, but also the overall climate action effort with the Charlottesville Acting on Climate Together part. There really is a reflection of things that we've heard from the community over the years, but also recognition that a lot of the action that needs to occur cannot be reliant on just government to do it, and we also can't rely on community to just do it on its own. We all need to work together in order to make a dent in what we're looking at here and start making some good progress. So for today's presentation, sorry, I'm trying to move my Zoom things around so I get all the controls. I was going to go over a quick overview of some of the current and ongoing activities that we have within the city's climate program, provide an update of where we are in the planning process for a climate action plan, and then also highlight some upcoming plan engagement opportunities that are going to be coming down the pike. In terms of our current and ongoing activities, the City of Charlottesville's climate program began back in 2006 with commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions community-wide. That commitment was then reaffirmed in 2017 when we joined the Global Covenant of Mayors commitment as well. The climate program works in a number of ways to support emission reductions in the community. This includes delivering programs and services, funding, community engagement, policy recommendations, best practices, and working with peer communities on policies, tracking what's happening, a lot of collaboration and information exchange as well. Back when we joined the Global Covenant of Mayors, the focus of our program grew from beyond being just on emissions reductions, and it also added in a climate resilience and adaptation track to it. There were new elements that came on board for us, so we also started doing annual reporting as part of the Global Covenant of Mayors commitment, And it really formalized also a focus on starting to develop a climate action plan. The Covenant of Mayors framework outlines 3 years to complete these steps. There's no, penalty if we don't do it in that timeline. And at the time when the city was joining this, we did acknowledge that due to resource and capacities pieces, we were going to probably have to extend that timeline and sequence these 2 planning processes rather than running them in parallel to each other. Where we are now is since joining the Covenant of Mayors, we have we've updated our greenhouse gas inventory. We adopted a new greenhouse gas reduction goal, which created a new baseline year that we are measuring from as 2011. As a result of that, we had to go back and update our 2011 inventory as well, so that it was in the right format to meet the Covenant of Mayors requirements on there. And then we have been collecting inventory data annually since the data year for 2016. We have started on the pathway to developing a climate action plan. We actually were teed up and ready to start this in 2020. And as many other things got derailed that year, and that was one of our pieces. We've had some start-stops on that, but we are very excited that we're now able to, in a position to renew our efforts on that and move that forward to conclusion. Also last fall, we started off the process to develop a climate adaptation plan. The first steps of that are to identify your climate hazards and then assess your climate vulnerabilities. We were thinking of starting that around 2021 to begin with. So we are very happy that we were able to get that process moving approximately around when we had originally envisioned to. And that process is also now still happening. So we do have activities over the next several months that will be related to completing our climate vulnerability assessment. When we're looking at how we do our different planning and where we focus for our climate action plan, one couple of key things to keep in mind is that when you look at Charlottesville's greenhouse gas emissions, about 95% of it is within the community and outside of the direct control of our local government sphere. When you dig into this a little bit further, what you start to see is really that 95% comes from 3 primary factors. So it's coming from the energy and what we're using to power our residential and our commercial businesses, and it's being generated by how we get around town and our transportation. In addition to what we're looking at with where our emissions come from, there are some other pieces that inform our climate program. There's a number of these things I've tried to capture here on the slide for you. But all of these pieces come together for us to then inform how we're trying to support our community to take action. And really where we've landed is with the aim of trying to increase the availability, affordability, accessibility, and awareness of programs, resources, and services that support climate action and bring benefits to our community. In order to do this, we often end up working through community partners, expanding and building upon programs and expertise that they already have. A couple of examples of what this ends up looking like is we have funded energy efficiency improvements in both residences and businesses. These come in the forms of hundreds of home energy assessments every year, providing funding for some small gap fill measures for low-income households to make sure that they are fully eligible for as many utility-funded programs as possible. We have energy smart home rebates, a commercial clean energy loan fund. We also support the Solarize Charlottesville campaign to help bring solar at an easy vetted, lower cost pathway for our residents and businesses. And then we're also furthering the support for different engagement programs. So the Home Energy Challenge, the Better Business Challenge, school climate kits. And this year in particular, we've added a targeted outreach initiative that's aimed at reaching parts of our community who are eligible for thousands of dollars of home energy improvements from state and utility funded programs. These dollars don't come with strings attached. You just have to meet the minimum eligibility requirements. And I think for most of us, we realize that if someone walked up to us on the street and said, hey, we can put thousands of dollars into your home, you don't have to do anything, we would all look at that person pretty skeptically and have a lot of questions for them. So what we were seeing with this is really that there's a lot of opportunity that's out there, but we really need help in connecting our residents to these resources so that they can understand the programs, they can feel confident moving forward, and they can see that benefit for them, both in the co-benefits that they get from taking action in this way, but also the things that go back to protecting our climate. In addition to working with community partners, we also have been doing and will continue to do activities where we are providing resources and resource development. A couple examples of this would be the city's composting programs or the urban heat island data collection campaign that we did last summer. We participate in informing policy at the state and local level. At the state level, a couple of examples are we participated in the building code update cycle, advocating for the state to adopt more higher levels of energy efficiency in its building code. At the city level, we participated in contributing to the comprehensive plan, zoning, and the city's standards and design manual. We also coordinate with peer communities across the Commonwealth on climate and energy policy priorities. There are also other city-led programs and efforts that we support across the organization, and we participate in regional coordination and community engagement activities. Some are like this. There's also the Climate Action Together umbrella that City, County, and UVA climate programs all work on. And if you guys might remember, in January, there was a climate vulnerability and resilience event that was hosted. That was a joint effort between the three of our organizations. And then looking inwards a little bit more at just within our municipal footprint, there's a number of different types of program efforts, both engagement, things to improve our building envelope, looking at our fleet, and then supporting other departments that are lead on some of these areas to help make sure that as they're looking at ways to improve or operational improvements, that climate is integrated in some of these considerations. What we've seen of where this is all added up to in terms of tracking our emissions is that we've seen a 30% reduction since 2011. That reduction is a combined result of action at the local level, the state and federal level, by utilities, markets, and industry altogether. It also sets us up pretty well in terms of looking to achieve our reduction goal by 2030. But there is still a lot of work to be done, especially when we're starting to look ahead beyond 2030 at reaching carbon neutrality. And so with that, I think it's a good kind of pivot over to talking about where we are in terms of our climate action planning. I had shown you this slide before that we are in the middle of two of our different planning phases. Climate adaptation, we had workshops in the fall, and then we will be having a survey coming out very shortly, and then we'll be having some workshops in June, with that process then concluding by the end of the summer. And in terms of our climate action planning, where we have completed doing city council briefings, community workshops, facilitated community stakeholder sessions, climate liaison meetings, and internal city briefings. Still to be completed is also a community survey, not the same as the one for our vulnerability assessment. It was the second one that will be aimed at emission reductions. These will be coming out at the same time, and both will be open until May 20th. So we will be seeing information coming out about these. It is two different surveys, and we're intentionally releasing them at the same time so that all of our messaging can make it hopefully as clear as possible that there's two surveys with two different focuses around climate that are going to be happening. We also will have a city council work session on Monday. The work session can be streamed live. It'll also be recorded and posted on the city's website. And in that session, we'll be talking about our climate action plan, where we are in the process, and sharing some preliminary content for the plan. Following that, we are also expecting, because we are only partway through our engagement process to develop our climate action plan, is we will have some town halls, some further staff and community engagement. We'll be drafting a plan, bringing out and getting input from both the Planning Commission, City Council, as well as the broader community, pulling all that back together to do revisions, and then getting to a final proposed plan. And so if you want to keep up to date on any of these activities, I am putting in a plug to sign up for the climate action news flashes on the city's website at charlottesville.gov/notify-me. That's where we publish things when we're going to council, when we have a new campaign, a new resource that's out there, surveys that are coming out, all of that we try to make sure we're pushing out through there. So there's a consistent source of information. Couple of other things of thinking about, well, what goes into inform our climate action plan? There are a number of things, and if you look through this list, it may look very similar to what I said was in this type of things that we're informing what our current planning or our current program efforts are. In a lot of ways, that's because it is the same sort of sources and the same sort of information that helps us to focus on where there are opportunities to make advances, where there are obstacles or barriers that can be overcome, and what does it look like to be able to come up with a strategy and action to achieve that. One of the things is with our Global Covenant of Mayors commitment is for our climate action plan. First and foremost is we have to make sure the plan is aimed at achieving the carbon reduction goals that the city has adopted. And so in looking into that a little bit deeper, I talked before about that 3 sectors really contribute 90% of the emissions that we have. What that looks like in terms of where those emissions are coming from, the type of activity data and the primary fuel sources that we have. These are the things that are then creating those calculations that are the emissions that we're releasing up into the atmosphere. When similar to that upside down pyramid slide that Andrea showed, there's the idea of if we can reduce the amount that we're putting up in the air, that means we have less that we then need to figure out how do we pull back down in order to reach our carbon neutrality. And so we're really going to be focusing for our climate action plan, trying to really aim at these sectors because this is where the majority of our emissions are coming from. And we want to try to reduce what's getting put up in the air as much as we can, and then look at what are our options to then bring the remaining amount down. One last thing that we want to be mindful of as we're developing our plan is thinking about the action and investment scale that would be needed for us to reach our goals. The chart on the left of these 3 different scenarios, this is something that we've shared during previous engagement around our climate action plan. In this one, along with the CIP, currently unfunded CIP budget projects, I think these give a really good representation on what it really means in terms of number of projects that need to be happening on the ground every year, what that scale of investment is. And it really speaks to the fact that this has to require action from both the community and from government, and that we can't just solely rely on existing utility or clean or grid commitments, and that we have to be aiming at action across multiple sectors and strategies and getting a combination of our building improvements, on-site renewables, transportation mode and fuel shifts, as well as all the other things that are happening in the bigger context around what we can do here locally. And so I'm roaming back over to these just to draw your attention to this as I wrap up. Please do keep an eye on the things in the green box on the right, and do sign up for our climate action news flashes, please. We will have the 2 different community surveys, one focused on informing our emission reduction plan, a second survey that was going to be focused on our climate vulnerability assessment. And then we have the council work session on Monday as well. All right. And with that, I'll hand the virtual mic back.
Thank you, Susan. It's good to find out about these surveys coming out too. I know a lot of people have things to say, and there were a ton of questions coming into the chat. So we'll look forward to having you stand by and answer some of those. So it's my pleasure now to introduce Peggy Van Yahres, who's chair of the Tree Commission. And I'll just lead off a little bit by saying that recent news revealed that Charlottesville's tree cover has dropped from 50% to 35% since 2004, signaling that more needs to be done to protect and increase the number of trees in the city. Thankfully, that work is being tackled by our final speaker this evening, Peggy Van Yahres. She's chair of the Charlottesville Tree Commission. Peggy spent most of her career devoted to improving children's education and the environment. As a landscape architect for 40 years, she and her husband had their own company, Van Yahres Associates, designing college campuses. She has served on many boards, including the city's school board, Parks and Rec Advisory Board, Board of Architectural Review, and Ready Kids. In addition to the Tree Commission, she now serves on the KTEC Foundation and the Relief Charlottesville Fund. That's spelled R-E-LEAF as in L-E-A-F. So welcome, Peggy, and so glad you could join us from the far reaches of Bath County.
Yes. All right. Let me see if I can share be as technologically. All right. Let's see if I can get my screen sharing here going. Sorry. Everybody else was so smooth and I'm having a hard time.
Well, you're in Bath County.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Okay. Well, thank you, Donna. I think everybody can see it now. Good. Well, I'm a little bit embarrassed because I'm going to concentrate on sort of a very simple thing, trees and the natural environment, and everybody else has been so comprehensive, but please put up with me for a little bit. As Donna said, my passions are the environment and kids' education. I'm a landscape architect by training. I'm married into a family of arborists, and so we are all tree lovers, as you can see. So I am now the chairman of the Charlottesville Tree Commission, and that is a body that is appointed by the city council. There are 13 of us, and we've been in force for about 10 years. So every year we give a presentation to city council about the state of the forest in the city. And this year we had a lot of news to share because every 4 to 5 years we do a canopy study to see what the tree cover is in Charlottesville, whether it's growing or declining. And Donna has already told you the secret that it's declining. All right. Now, why can't I get mine? Okay. So what we did our last tree study, which we actually just finished this year, just did the data to 2018 because of some technological factors that are way beyond my ability to understand. But anyway, we can see from 2004 to 2018 that our canopy has declined 10%. Our goal is 50%. And some people think that's not realistic, but look at Richmond's goal. Richmond has a goal of 60%. So our city is not protecting nor expanding our tree canopy. And it's really evident in this slide here. Now, so that loss of 10% is equivalent to 660 acres. And we transpose that on the map of the city. And you can see how much of what an impact that has made on the city in the years from 2004 to 2018. Now, Donna said that the canopy is reduced to 35%, but I have to clarify, this is what we project, because from 2004 to 2014, it declined 5%, but then in 4 years from between 2014 and 2018, just 4 years instead of 10, it declined 5%. So if you look at today, 4 years later, and if you use that same 5% loss, which we're not sure of, but we can project, we're at 35%, 15% loss. And you can see again, the circle is growing larger and quite an impact on the city's landscape. Every year we have a goal of planting 200 trees. We've never been able to do it. And in fact, as you look at the map there, the green is the number of trees we planted. The pink is the number of trees that have come down. We're not even keeping up with the number of trees that we lose every year. FY21 was really bad because that was COVID and we got no money from the city. So we planted very few trees. But this year, the city is, we're keeping our we know, keeping our fingers crossed, but the city has given us $100,000. So this FY23, we should be able to plant 200 trees and finally meet our goal. Now, just to give you an illustration of what's sort of happening in the city, is that one of the problems is that we don't have strong enough codes to protect our existing trees. And I'm going to tell you this story just looking at Garrett Street. Garrett Street in 2016 was used by the city as a prime example of a tree planted street. It had mature oaks all the way down it. And they held it up in a document called The Streets at Work as a well-designed street. Well, that's not true anymore, we're sad to say. In 2020, and I hate to say the name of the company, but Apex was allowed to take down 8 of our large oaks. In 2000, excuse me, let me go back. In 2021, along Garrett Street, another company took down a bunch of other oaks, and they planted 1 tree. I think you might be able to see it if you look in the red circle. Today, or this week, we lost more trees. The first phase of Friendship Court, which is a wonderful project, very much needed in the city, the rehabilitation of our public housing. But again, you can see before and after, 3 trees and another one, and you can see how big they are, is bound to come down. So by our city codes, we are basically deforesting our city and streets. We don't think that it has to be an either or. We think that we can renovate our public housing, we can have more affordable housing, but we can have trees too. It's not an either or, as long as we plan from the very beginning to save the trees that we can. So that did not happen on this project. But we've been assured by the city, the next couple of phases, they're going to be very careful about the trees. So actions required. Now, let me just tell you a little bit about what the Tree Commission does on an ongoing basis. We advise staff, council, and the Planning Commission. We engage with the public. We always celebrate Arbor Day. And a couple of years ago, we celebrated this great oak at Venable School. We collaborate with other nonprofits, such as the Sierra Club. And we monitor the effects of development on our green infrastructure, particularly our trees. Now, we have 2 priorities for this year. One is the city, as you know, is rewriting the zoning codes. I think the zoning ordinance is about 15 years old. It is not strong in requiring new trees or protecting existing trees. So the main objectives we have as we look at the zoning ordinance are to increase requirements for new trees, strengthen and enforce tree protection, establish consequences for public tree damage. For instance, again, this is Apex, when they took down 8 big oaks. In Richmond has an ordinance. If a developer is allowed to take down public trees, these are all public trees, they either have to plant the equivalent on their site, and this is by 1 inch by 1 inch of the diameter of the tree. So if you have a 30-inch tree, you're going to have to plant 15 2-inch trees. Or they pay into a fund to the city, which allows the city to plant more trees. And it can add up to tens and thousands of dollars. In Richmond, in one case, was $100,000, or even more than that. And so this is the way Richmond gets to plant a lot more trees. That's how they're going to reach their 60% canopy, I think. And then, of course, we need to refine the site planning application and review, because that's where sort of the rubber hits the road, really, whether we get more trees or we damage existing trees. Now, our second initiative this year is a fund we call Relief, and Donna spelled it correctly, Seville. And we believe we're going to make a big fat claim that trees save lives. So our mission is to improve the health and well-being of our neighborhoods with low tree cover from the heat of impact of climate change. And the Tree Commission initiated this project because for the last couple of years, we've been reading about the connection, particularly between trees and health, and how trees reduce the heat and they reduce pollution. And so therefore, it reduces heart attacks, strokes, asthma. And we're finding in some of our neighborhoods that have low tree cover, that they have higher incidence of all these diseases. So we started, this has just been up and running for about 8 months. So we're a new organization or a new fund. And we have 3 objectives. We're going to plant trees, particularly on private property where the city does not. We're going to preserve the existing trees in our lower income neighborhoods. It's expensive to preserve existing trees, but we want to create a fund that help people can do that, because we know if we preserve existing trees, they're going to do a lot more to combat climate change and to protect people's health than the new trees that we plant. We're going to educate kids and families about trees and nature. So our first target is going to be the 10th and Page neighborhood, which has one of the lowest tree coverage in the city at 8%. It also has very few places for public trees. We know that it has health consequences and energy consequences. We know that 10th and Page neighborhood most of the families there spend 10% or more on energy costs of their income. The average in the city family in the city spends 2.3%. We know that in 10th and Page that the highest health consequences there are cardiac arrest and asthma. Now, we don't know that obviously that's all linked to trees and heat and pollution, but still it's an indicator. It's much higher than other areas in the city. So we're going to collaborate, Relief, Tree Commission, and Tree Stewards are going to collaborate to plant more trees in this neighborhood. So that's what we do to plant and preserve trees. Educate. So we started really with education because we feel that if we can educate kids and teenagers about the value of trees and the natural environment in the city, that's going to bubble up to their parents, to their grandparents. And so we've been doing a lot of working with kids and teenagers. Just next week, we're going to have an event at Charlottesville High School called Environmental Career Fair. We got 25 vendors and organizations that are going to be there that teach kids about the value of the natural environment and trees, and to let them know about jobs in the green industry and maybe even summer jobs. So it's going to be fun. We're going to have popcorn and music and no dancing, I don't think, but we're going to have fun. At the City of Promise, we're going to develop a teenage ambassador program. We'll work with about 10 teenagers from the 10th and Page neighborhood this summer. We'll teach them about trees, the value of nature in the city, about climate change, and then they'll help us go knock on doors toward the end of the summer in their own neighborhood. And we think this is a good way to approach people and get more trees planted and educate them about the value of the natural environment and climate change. We're giving presentations to elementary schools. We hope to do it at the City Promise soon. I'm going to give you just a brief introduction to that presentation. I'm not going to take you through it, the whole thing. But as I tell everyone, I was much more nervous presenting to 3rd and 4th graders than I am presenting to you tonight. I haven't, although I'm a teacher a long time ago, I haven't worked with 3rd and 4th graders in a long time. So here's just a little bit of our presentation. Why are trees important to you? So trees improve health. This was an interesting experiment we did right on the Venable playground. Venable has 2 playgrounds. One has no tree shade, even though it's trees on the edge, but has no canopy trees. It's hot. On one day in September, we recorded the temperature. It was 102 degrees. Now they have another playground. It's completely shaded by trees. And the temperature there was 82 degrees. That's a 20% difference. And we know that young children and the elderly are particularly vulnerable when it comes to heat. So I think this was an eye-opener for us and for them. We talked to them about all kinds of things that trees do. Trees help animals by providing them a home. Everyone thinks we photoshopped this, but we didn't. This is in a place, maybe Morocco, where the goats, you can see they have nothing to eat on the ground. So where else are you going to go? You got to get in a tree. So that's just a little bit of our presentation. So who we are. So as I said, the Tree Commission initiated this project. We were initially funded by the Virginia chapter of the Nature Conservancy. It's a partnership between the Tree Commission, the Nature Conservancy here in Charlottesville, City of Promise, Charlottesville Area Tree Stewards, and Van Yahres Tree Company. So just want to remind you again, the tree canopy loss is accelerating. We know this is true, and we think it's even worse than that. And we all need to do things to reverse this trend, particularly in our neighborhoods that have low tree canopy. So thank you very much. Okay.
Sorry, I had to unmute.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Peggy.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it. You don't have to apologize for only talking about trees. Gabe and Susan can tell you that the first time we Zoomed about tonight's meeting, I told them how in watching a presentation they had given, I was so intrigued by the story of a local woman who had received help in planting a tree on her property. So I was really especially delighted that you could join us tonight and explain your work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all our speakers sharing your expertise and time with us. It's really exciting to hear about things like the Stewardship Hub coming online, the fact that the UVA reached their carbon emissions goal for 2025 early, everything that's going on with the city. This is such a serious crisis and is so important for us to understand local challenges, what is being done to address them, and how we can personally support and assist in this progress. I'm imagining our audience has plenty of questions for you, so let's start our Q&A. Audience members, please enter your questions in the chat if you haven't already done so. And Alex, take it away.
All right, we have tons of questions in the chat, so we're going to start with one for Mr. Dayley. What are some of the actions that have been identified so far as priorities in the Climate Action Plan?
That's a good question. So we're still kind of in the midst of the prioritization process, so we haven't created the final kind of roll up of numbers to prioritize. So I'm in the middle of putting in all the scores. We used our scoring framework. It's a big spreadsheet. It looks at kind of resource input side and then looks at the benefits, the impacts, greenhouse gas emissions, et cetera, local health, local environmental quality. And so we were inspired by a similar framework that Richmond used in their climate action plan. I think Richmond's been mentioned once or twice tonight. So continuing to work on that. I'll hold off on speaking to kind of actions that are actually rising to the top yet, because we haven't finished entering all the prioritization numbers to be able to say that. If I could answer another question I saw in the chat that's related, someone had asked about measurable goals, which in part is what this prioritization effort is seeking to support and dovetail with. So there's room for improvement in the measurability of the goals in the climate action plan. Each of those sectors that I shared has goals, and right now they're not as specific, measurable, or time bound as they could be. Mentioning a couple of the terms from that acronym SMART, if folks are familiar with it. We're in a process right now of trying to adapt and update the goals in our climate action plan so that they are smarter, so to speak, which will help us with being more strategic with the implementation of the plan and scoring the actions.
All right. We have a question for Andrea. What fuels is UVA burning on ground?
So, so we burn fuels for thermal energy, to create thermal energy for buildings, and then we burn fuels for our fleet. So fleet uses biodiesel and diesel, but there's a project underway to start to transition all of them to electric buses over the years. And then for the main heat plant, the primary gas is natural gas. I mentioned the hospital before and the need for resiliency and backup fuel. So coal is currently the backup fuel. And so that is used on a small scale when not enough natural gas is available. But there's a main heat plant fuel conversion project that's been proposed. So in the next 4 years, less than 5 years, the coal should be gone, but we will need a firm fuel backup. Even if we went to full electrification, there's not enough battery storage capacity. Technology will change along the way, but we'll need a firm fuel backup, which likely will be some sort of biofuels.
I think kind of going off of that, Also for you, Andrea, does UVA have a plan to divest from fossil fuel investments?
So the current, let me link, I have a couple links. The latest, so UVIMCO is the investment management company. Let me put it in the chat. This is the latest article. So they recently put forward this investor responsibility framework, which puts forward UVIMCO's first sustainability ESG type goals for UVA's endowment. But this investor, they know in it that this investor responsibility framework is being developed over the coming months and that they'll have a report this summer. So there's definitely much more to come out of UVIMCO, but this is what they have put forward so far. And it's pretty recent, last month.
For Miss Elliott, what is the city's strategy for mitigating the heat island effect in areas where mature trees are removed to make room for high-density apartment buildings?
So that's a good question. That's one of the pieces that we haven't gotten to yet in our planning process. So I can't tell you an official strategy that the city has on it. I think that is one of the things that we are looking at in terms of two parts of the questions. Is one, there are benefits to tree canopy and more than just the urban heat island pieces to it. But one of the other pieces that we're interested in exploring is there are some sites where a tree isn't the best fit, like the tree can't grow and be healthy, or it can't reach that big canopy structure. It's going to end up impeding on foundations or utilities or things like that. And so while there are a lot of places that trees are a very good solution, we also want to make sure that for those places and the sites where it's not a good fit to put a tree, and so often that's also because it's not good for the health of the tree itself, what are other sort of vegetative or other ways that we can mitigate the heat pieces on that? And then I think I might have seen Peggy unmute. I'm not sure if you have something from the Tree Commission side that you'd like to offer as a response to that. Please go ahead.
Well, as you know, most of our heat islands are in the neighborhoods that have low canopy. And as we talked about with relief, there's not a lot of public land there. And they're small lots. So there's not a lot of public land for the city to plant trees. So that's why that's one reason we started this fund and working with the Charlottesville area tree stewards too. We're trying to go into those neighborhoods and plant more trees and preserve trees. And the city too, one of our priorities on the tree commissions, we have priorities where we plant new trees. And one of them is certainly in the low canopy neighborhoods. It's just often hard to find public property because these neighborhoods have been redlined. They weren't, it's sad to say, but they didn't have a lot of public amenities there historically. And inequitable planning ordinances and codes have prevented a lot of public property there. So it's going to take a lot of planting on private property to reverse some of this heat island effect.
Also for Peggy, while we have you here, does the Tree Commission play any role in the climate action plan that was mentioned earlier in the talk?
We haven't talked directly, but we're planning to have more of Susan's staff to our Tree Commission meetings. We talked with the head of Public Works and we asked if, we could collaborate more. So I think we will certainly in the future.
I would, if I can follow that up a little bit, for whether it's the Tree Commission or any of our board and advisory boards or committees, whenever we are putting out something for community input, like we would very much encourage people who are representing those areas to partake in that and provide input in through those processes as well. It's not, it's I guess we kind of see a lot of our community engagement as if you're a member of community and you're serving on our board, like absolutely, we want to hear what you have to say as well.
This is a question for any of the speakers. Are there any plans or initiatives to increase alternative transportation options such as additional bicycle lanes or even better designated bike paths?
I can take a first stab at that. That is those are two strategies that definitely help to speak to mode shift. And one of the things that we have heard over the years is that when people who are particularly nervous about biking on urban roads, having just a bike lane, they don't feel as safe and supported as if you can have a separated path or a shared use path. That slide that I showed that had projects that, like scenarios in terms of if we're focusing in on just our building improvements, and then the other one that was proposals that had been put forward on our CIP list that are currently unfunded. On that CIP list, there were several projects that spoke to trails, at least several of which are including shared use paths.
I would add that the county has, and the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission have transportation plans that look at increasing, urban greenways, increasing walkability and bikeability at kind of key intersections where currently that are lacking, and overall improving the connectivity of where there is existing infrastructure to where there isn't. I think the main question for us going forward is, and kind of for all of us as a community going forward, is looking at how can we increase the funding opportunities and kind of quicken those processes so that we can scale up those efforts to hopefully add that infrastructure sooner than might otherwise happen.
Also for you, Gabe, when will the county open another recycling center?
I am probably not the best person to answer that question off the top of my head. Certainly relate with that kind of work. So my understanding is that the Keene Material Utilization Center in Southern Albemarle was approved sometime last fall. I don't know what the exact kind of development timeline of that is, but my understanding is that project is moving forward. As well as in the last few years, a few new services were added to the Ivy Material Utilization Center. But in terms of more specifics than that, I would probably need to get back to folks.
For Andrea, someone was wondering if UVA takes into consideration the vehicles that are owned by students.
Yes, so the vehicles owned by students, maybe if the question is around commuting miles and emissions from student travel, so the way that's sort of hard to capture because you're sort of basing it on asking students where are they going and how often and how they travel. So the emissions data really gets captured in VDOT data through the city and through the county for student, staff, and faculty. We do a survey every few years to try to understand that, but it is sort of anecdotal. It's students reporting on where they're going and how often, and we sort of extrapolate that out to get a rough order of magnitude in order to address some strategies. We don't see students really commuting via car to class. It's more external to their classes that they're moving around. For us, the students and staff airplanes are very, very small because our emissions on everything else is so huge. It's time. But we track it to the extent we can, and we're getting better data on staff airline travel, but purchasing is fairly decentralized, so it's tough to like get it all in one place. We're getting good data on the academic side. We're trying to gather it for everything else. We have good data for study abroad, and study abroad is offsetting those emissions through some tree planting. But the student data is in the city and the county's numbers in terms of emissions.
For Ms. Elliott, when will the climate action plan be complete? And then this commenter said that I think it's important for the community for us to know a specific goal for completion from the city.
So we're aiming for by the end of this year. A lot of it depends on what sort of input and how many iterations or revisions we need to do and what that sort of what type of community input we're getting. Does it seem like the community is coming to consensus in terms of what we're hearing, or if there are disagreements within a community input, needing to open up space to then accommodate what those conversations are. but we are aiming for by the end of this calendar year.
Thank you. For Peggy, will the city consider future ordinances to reduce or eliminate the use of natural gas?
Well, I don't think I can answer that again. As I said, sort of, I'm concentrated on trees and the natural environment, so I think Susan would be able to answer that better than I can.
Sorry, I was checking something in the chat. Could you repeat the question? I heard you say Peggy's name, and then I started looking at the chat window. I apologize.
Will the city consider future ordinances to reduce or eliminate the use of natural gas?
It's definitely something that came up during the comprehensive plan part and CVille plans together that we heard from the community. I know there are a couple of planning commissioners who are interested in having a bigger conversation around that. But that's until we have those conversations, I can't really say any more in terms of what the city will or will not do.
Mm-hmm. This one is for Susan, but Peggy, you might also have something to say about it. As a way to encourage city residents to contribute to the health of the urban canopy, could the city do a campaign to educate citizens on the value of cutting the bottom of huge vines, such as English ivy, that cover trees you see in many neighborhoods around town?
Yeah. Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah, go ahead, and I might have an additional comment of something I've heard recently, but I think you're probably better suited for that question.
Yeah, part of our goals is to educate on the tree commission. And that's something, in fact, I just got an email the other day, maybe the same person was asking the question about the ivy. And of course, we work on public trees, but even public trees I know have ivy growing on them and they need to be cut. We haven't had an arborist for about 8 months. So we've been a little bit under the weather there of getting up to speed of taking care of our trees. But it's something on my list to talk to the new arborist, which I'm going to do next week, because particularly this question. And I just, as I said the other day, just got an email on the exact same thing. So it's something we're aware of and we want to do more of, but we're just getting our urban forester back in the saddle. And so we'll be on that.
Yeah, and I would add on to that, definitely having robust and healthy trees is a big part of what then makes them effective as a climate provision or climate action. And so the city does have an urban forest management plan, making sure that we go back, we check that, see, is it robust enough? Is it meeting the standards that are wanted and that can be supported? I think that all does tie in nicely with in terms of what we're looking at on the climate action side of things, and getting rid of invasives and the vines is a piece of, one of those things, of making sure that the forest and the clusters of trees we do have do remain healthy.
And I have one last question for Gabe. This is my own question. I am not from Albemarle or Charlottesville. How do I find the climate action plan for my county? Should it be on the website, or how do I go about finding that?
Oh, like for where you're from?
Yes. Yeah.
That's a good question. Well, it's probably a little bit different for different communities. But one of the ways that we got some ideas for the design of our climate action plan was looking at the caps from other communities. And so, usually I think a good place to start, since local government websites can be big, is to Google that locality. Let's say it's New York, or New York City, or New Orleans, or something like that, and then Google sustainability program or climate action plan, better yet, in your Google search, and often those the search engines will be able to pick it up, so you can dig into the community where you're from. In terms of Albemarle, and I know Susan did this as well, I also stuck in the chat the climate program page for Albemarle County. So for folks who are interested in looking up information locally, that's in the chat.
Thank you so much. I think that's
Charlotte, you're muted.
You would think by now that I would be better at that. Sorry. Thank you, everybody, so much for being here. That was wonderful. So much important information. Really looking forward to seeing what else comes out from your respective organization.